Let's continue this conversation with the president of Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton. Tom, it's great to see you. These aren't the only allegations against ActBlue out there. I mean, Elon Musk is accusing the Democrat platform of funding groups responsible for the so-called demonstrations against Tesla. ActBlue denies any wrongdoing, by the way. Musk does point out that ActBlue is currently under investigation for allowing foreign and illegal donations in criminal violation of campaign finance laws. Tom, what are your thoughts on all this?
Well, what's really interesting about ActBlue is recently, just in the last week, it's been announced essentially their core leadership has fled. So a lot of their key people are gone, which suggests there was something going on that caused them to flee. And you have to wonder whether these questions about taking money knowingly from sources that they knew or had reason to know were not valid, like from abroad for political campaigns, whether that's the issue that we're concerned about, or as Elon Musk is highlighting, that it's one thing to be funding public policy debates through charitable donations and political operations. It's another thing to be funding terrorism and political violence against your opponents. And what I think is going on against Tesla and Elon Musk is terrorist activity. And it's dangerous, it's violent, and it's also directed at a federal official. The left, as the left reminds us, he works for Trump. He works in the White House. And when you engage in violence targeting a federal official to stop him from doing his work, there are other serious crimes, both criminal and civil, that arise from that. And so anyone involved in that seems to be, should be subject to investigations. What's going on against Tesla? The FBI needs to be all over it, assuming they're capable of doing anything other than investigating parents and people going to church.
Yeah, indeed. Reid Hoffman, who also has denied any wrongdoing here, was asked about this fundraising during an interview on the, what is it, All In podcast. Here's what he had to say.
Have you spent any money to try to impact RFK one way or the other?
I wouldn't be surprised if we look at all the money that goes to all the different organizations, if Organization X kind of had some kind of ballot thing. My voice and instruction was always like, no, don't do that. That's anti-democratic. But, you can't control everything, just like you invest in a company, and CEOs sometimes the dumbass shit that you can't do anything about.
Yeah, I can't control all that money. You buying that, Tom?
No, they know exactly what's going on here. It's not like they have to have someone coordinating it. They all share the same values. And thinking back to the coup against Biden by Harris and Obama and Pelosi, remember those billions of dollars that all of a sudden magically appeared shortly after she took over the nomination? I think that's curious and interesting. And in light of ActBlue's prominent role in fundraising for the left, and not only organizationally but politically in terms of campaigns, the amount of money that they raised and the serious questions about whether the proper controls were in place needs to be the subject, as I said, of a serious criminal investigation. And I tell you, if you're involved in supporting terrorists abroad by also engaging in terrorism here, as we're seeing up in Colombia with that student being arrested by the Trump administration for supporting terrorism, they wanted to deport him. Who was helping him run those so-called protests? There's got to be a line.
Yeah,
it's one thing to have First Amendment speech.
Fair question.
But if you're working in league with terrorist organizations through transnational left-wing groups, that's a much more significant legal issue.
Sure it is. And last thing I wanted to get into with you is this. I want to ask you about this scandal that's coming to light. Joe Biden may have not been signing any of these executive orders, the pardons, his entire occupation of the Oval Office. Apparently it was all being done through this auto pen device. Legal experts are saying if Biden's apparatchiks were signing things in his name and without his knowledge and permission, it could invalidate his entire occupation of the Oval Office. How do you see this?
I think it's an interesting issue. And if I were President Trump, I'd start looking at the documents underlying what Biden did in the White House, figure out who was running the show. the legality of the executive order being signed auto pan versus in person aside, the big issue is, given President Biden's obvious cognitive decline that was covered up by people around him in the media, we need to know who was making decisions, because, you know, if you don't know who's making the decisions, you don't know if they're being made for proper reasons, right? You know, Biden, you know, everyone knows what Biden's about. I dare you to go and ask someone, who was the chief of staff for Joe Biden? Who was his domestic policy advisor? No one in D.C. knows who was working in the Biden White House. They were this anonymous cabal, relatively speaking, who the media was very uninterested in reporting on. Compare and contrast that with reporting on Elon Musk, with who was running the Biden administration. And, you know, and I think the challenge for Republicans is, why weren't they asking these questions 2 years ago? They should have been having hearings on the 25th Amendment and could have been exploring this. They may not have been able to remove him under the 25th Amendment, but they could have been asking tough questions of people around him. And they still can, frankly.
Bingo. And the only reason why Democrats get away with what they get away with is because of the timidity of Republicans. Tom Fitton, thank goodness for Judicial Watch. Thank you, man. Appreciate the time.